Most murders leave behind anger, panic, or chaos. This one left almost nothing, and that absence may tell us more about the killer's mind than any confession ever could. On paper, the case looks simple. A man was found dead in a public park. 2 gunshot wounds. No witnesses who saw the moment itself. No struggle. No clear motive that immediately made sense. But when you sit with the file long enough, a different picture begins to form. Not a story of rage, but of preparation. Not an explosion of emotion, but a quiet decision carried out with disturbing calm. Tonight, we are not here to dramatize violence or to chase easy answers. We are here to examine what the silence around this crime may indicate about the person who committed it, about the systems that tried to explain it, and about how some murders resist closure even after the evidence is cataloged and the case appears complete. This is a real murder case, and what it reveals is not obvious, but it is deeply human. A quiet place, an ordinary evening. It was a public park in Northern Europe, the kind people walk through without thinking about it. A place shaped by routine rather than danger. Wooden benches lined the paths. Trees stood close enough to soften the city noise, but not block it entirely. Streetlights cast a low amber glow, uneven and familiar. In the distance, traffic moved steadily, the sound muted by leaves and open space. It was summer. The air was mild. Nothing about the setting suggested urgency or threat. This matters because violence often announces itself through disruption. Here, nothing appeared disrupted at all. The discovery. In the early hours of the morning, a passerby noticed something that did not belong. A body lying still where movement was expected. There was no shouting. No crowd gathered. Emergency services arrived quickly and did what procedure required. The man was pronounced dead at the scene. The area was secured. Photographs were taken. Measurements were recorded. The park, for the most part, remained quiet. There was no spectacle. No immediate chaos. The city did not stop moving. Who the victim was? The victim was a middle-aged man, not wealthy, not prominent. According to available records, he lived a relatively quiet life. He had routines, predictable ones. He moved through familiar spaces. He interacted with a small, consistent social circle. He was known, but not widely. There were no indications of ongoing disputes, no documented threats, no public conflicts that might have foreshadowed what happened. In the language of criminal investigation, he did not present as someone at risk. That absence is important. First questions. Few answers. Early examination of the scene revealed no signs of robbery. Personal belongings were still with him. There was no immediate evidence of a struggle. No obvious markers of a personal confrontation. For investigators, this created an uncomfortable starting point. Cases often begin with motive. Here, motive was missing. When violence does not align with familiar categories, domestic, financial, retaliatory, it resists quick explanation. The investigation from its earliest hours was shaped by uncertainty rather than direction. Why this case deserves attention? This case is not significant because it was loud, complex, or spectacular. It matters because it was none of those things. It reveals how lethal violence can occur without warning, without escalation, and without visible conflict. It also shows how investigative systems are challenged when a crime does not announce its meaning clearly. Some murders fracture a community instantly. Others, like this one, settle quietly into the record. And when a death does not disrupt the social order loudly, it often takes longer for investigators, for families, and for the public to understand what it truly represents. What we know for certain, the confirmed timeline begins hours before the body was found. According to phone records and witness statements, the victim followed a familiar pattern that evening. He moved through the city using routes he had taken many times before. There were no recorded deviations, No abrupt changes in behavior, no signals of distress. Nothing suggests he believed he was being followed or watched. The medical examiner later established a time window for death spanning a narrow range in the late evening. The estimate was based on body temperature lividity and environmental exposure. It was summer and the weather was stable. No heavy rain. No extreme cold. These conditions matter because they reduce uncertainty. They allow us to be reasonably confident about when the act occurred, even if the why remains unclear. The park itself was not abandoned that night. It was lightly used. A few people passed through earlier in the evening. Others moved along the perimeter streets. Lighting was functional, but subdued, creating pockets of visibility rather than full illumination. It was a space where someone could be seen, yet not closely observed. What the evidence suggests. Ballistic evidence and body positioning tell us something about the encounter. The shots were fired at close range. The angle and placement indicate control rather than chaos. The victim did not attempt to flee. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle, no defensive wounds consistent with a drawn-out confrontation. This suggests the interaction was brief, possibly seconds long. Investigators often look for signs of escalation. Raised voices, physical resistance, environmental disruption. None were documented here. The ground around the body showed no indication of a fight. Nearby objects remained undisturbed. This absence narrows the range of plausible scenarios. The weapon and the method. The firearm used was effective and employed decisively. Shots were placed in a way that ensured lethality rather than intimidation. This matters because it shifts how we interpret intent. In impulsive acts of violence, weapon use often reflects emotion, poor aim, excessive force, or erratic discharge. Here, the opposite appears to be true. The method was efficient, purposeful. There is no indication the act escalated from an argument or confrontation. It suggests the decision to kill was made before the trigger was pulled. Behavioral observations at the scene. One of the most striking features of this case is what no one heard. No witness reported raised voices. No one recalled shouting, pleading, or threats. The record is silent on any verbal exchange between the victim and the person who shot him. That silence is not proof, but it is data. In many homicide cases, sound carries the emotional residue of the act. Here, it does not. The lack of auditory evidence supports the idea that the encounter did not involve negotiation or conflict in the conventional sense. Early psychological indicators. From a behavioral perspective, the efficiency of the act may indicate emotional detachment. There is no sign of hesitation, no evidence of second-guessing at the scene. The perpetrator appears to have arrived with a singular objective. This does not mean the act was cold in a moral sense. It means it was likely processed internally long before it occurred. The violence itself may have been the final step in a cognitive sequence already completed. Some offenders rehearse physically, others rehearse psychologically. We cannot say which occurred here, but the structure of the act suggests preparation of some kind. Understanding the type of violence. This distinction matters. Impulsive violence erupts. Instrumental violence concludes. One is driven by immediate emotion, the other by an internal decision that precedes the moment. Based on the available evidence, this crime appears less about anger and more about completion of an internal decision already made, and that realization shifts the entire trajectory of how this case must be understood. The victim as a psychological presence. When investigators reviewed the victim's life, what emerged was not a mystery, but a pattern of normalcy. He had daily routines that rarely changed. He moved through the same streets, visited familiar places, and kept a modest social circle. Friends and acquaintances later described him as reserved, predictable, and unassuming. Someone who did not draw attention to himself. someone who did not appear to live at the edges of conflict. In psychological terms, the victim's presence in the world was quiet. That quiet matters. It shapes how his death was experienced by those who knew him. There was no history of volatility to reinterpret, no hidden disputes to suddenly reframe. His life, as remembered, did not provide an explanation for his death. What his killing disrupted was not a narrative of danger, but a sense of continuity, a routine that simply stopped. Family and community response. For the family, the initial shock was compounded by the absence of a story. Grief often seeks structure, a reason, an argument that went wrong, a threat that escalated. Here there was nothing to hold on to. This kind of loss creates a specific psychological burden. Without a clear motive, mourning becomes suspended. Questions repeat without resolution. The mind circles the same unknowns. Why him, why then, what was missed? The community response followed a similar pattern. Concern followed by distance. Without a recognizable cause, fear did not spread in obvious ways. Life resumed. The park reopened. The city absorbed the event quietly. Inside the investigation, investigators approached the case with professional restraint. That restraint is not indifference. It is discipline. Emotional involvement can cloud judgment, especially when facts are limited. Still, the pressure to identify motive was constant. Motive organizes evidence. It gives direction. Without it, every lead carries equal weight and equal uncertainty. As days passed and leads narrowed, frustration became part of the process. Not anger, not defeat. A quieter frustration rooted in the recognition that some cases resist narrative clarity. The file grew thicker, but answers did not accumulate at the same pace. What happened after the crime? The behavior of the perpetrator after the killing offers one of the most telling elements of this case. There was no immediate evidence of flight, no sudden disappearance, no abrupt break from daily life detected in the records that surfaced later. On the contrary, available information suggests a return to routine, continued functioning, ordinary movement through time. This is significant. In many violent crimes, fear dominates the aftermath. Panic drives erratic decisions. Mistakes multiply. Here, that pattern does not appear. The absence of urgency may indicate the offender did not experience the act as a personal crisis. Interpreting the absence of panic. From a psychological standpoint, this absence can suggest several possibilities. One is moral disengagement, the capacity to commit violence without integrating it emotionally. In such cases, the act is compartmentalized. It does not disrupt self-image because it has already been justified internally. Another possibility is belief-driven violence. When an act is perceived as necessary or meaningful within a personal framework, emotional fallout may be limited. The individual may feel aligned rather than threatened by what they have done. We cannot know which applies here. The record is silent on internal motivation. What we can say is that fear does not appear to have guided post-offense behavior. Why this matters: post-crime behavior often reveals more than the crime itself. The act may be brief. The aftermath unfolds over time. In this case, the lack of visible distress avoidance or disruption suggests that the violence did not conflict with the perpetrator's internal logic. Whether that logic was emotional numbness or ideological justification remains unknown. What matters is that the killing did not fracture the offender's sense of order. And that insight reframes the crime. What the perpetrator did after the crime may be more revealing than the act itself. What the file does not contain. As the investigation progressed, the case file began to show its most defining feature: absence. There were time windows that could not be fully accounted for, periods where the victim's movements were inferred rather than confirmed. No definitive marker for the exact moment the encounter began. Surveillance offered little help. Cameras existed, but coverage was incomplete. Some angles did not reach the paths in question. Other footage was unusable due to lighting limitations or technical degradation. The technology of the time captured fragments, not continuity. Witnesses were interviewed. Many had passed through the area. None had seen anything that registered as unusual. Others reported noticing nothing at all. In a public space designed for quiet movement, this was not unexpected. Still, the record remains largely silent. Silence as data. In criminal analysis, silence is often mistaken for failure. But silence is information. The absence of witnesses suggests opportunity, a space where visibility exists without scrutiny. The lack of disturbance implies that the environment allowed violence to occur without drawing attention. The missing moments in the timeline are not random gaps. They describe conditions under which a crime could be committed efficiently. What is not present in the file narrows the range of explanations. It suggests the act fits seamlessly into its surroundings. Technological limits of the era. The case unfolded in the late 1990s, a period of transition in forensic investigation. DNA analysis existed, but databases were limited in scope. Matches required existing records. Without them, samples could remain dormant indefinitely. Digital tracking was minimal. Mobile phones did not yet generate the kind of location data now considered routine. Internet activity left fewer traces. The modern expectation of digital footprints did not apply. This context matters. It explains why certain questions were never answered, not because they were ignored, but because the tools to answer them did not yet exist. Institutional constraints. Investigations do not occur in isolation. They operate within systems shaped by resources and priorities. Cases are triaged. Personnel are reassigned. New crimes demand immediate attention. When a case lacks momentum, it slowly receives less time, not by decision, but by necessity. Jurisdictional boundaries further complicate progress. Information does not always flow smoothly between agencies. Leads that cross borders require coordination time and justification. None of this implies negligence. It reflects structure. The human cost of delay for families. The gradual slowing of an investigation carries a distinct emotional toll. At first, there are updates, calls, meetings, then longer pauses, eventually silence. This silence does not feel neutral. It feels like abandonment even when it is not. The lack of new information prolongs grief rather than resolving it. Hope remains, but it thins. Investigators experience a different fatigue. They remember the case. They revisit it when new information emerges, but without fresh data, effort yields little return. Over time, the case shifts from active pursuit to monitored inactivity. The file is not closed. It is set aside. How cases cool. Cold cases are often described as puzzles that resist solution because the perpetrator was clever. This framing is misleading. More often, cases cool because the environment provided concealment technology offered limited reach and human memory faded. Evidence did not vanish through manipulation. It was never captured. The system did not fail dramatically. It functioned within its limits. Understanding the silence. The unanswered questions in this case are not evidence of hidden brilliance or elaborate planning. They are the result of alignment between opportunity timing and systemic constraint. When violence leaves behind few signals, it does not challenge the system aggressively. It simply passes through it. Cold cases are often created by silence, not by cunning, and understanding that silence is essential to understanding this crime. What the system eventually reached in the years that followed the case did not remain entirely static. Information accumulated slowly. Certain connections were clarified. At some point, the legal system was able to act on what could be proven within its standards. Arrests were made, charges were filed, a conviction followed. From a legal perspective, the case reached an endpoint. Responsibility was assigned, a sentence was imposed. The system did what it is designed to do. It identified a party accountable for the act and applied punishment accordingly. But the law addresses conduct, not consciousness. It establishes what happened and who can be held responsible. It does not and cannot fully address why a particular human decision took the shape that it did. The limits of closure is often spoken of as if it were a natural outcome of resolution. In reality, closure is uneven. For families, a verdict may answer one question while leaving others untouched. Knowing who committed the act does not necessarily explain why their loved one was chosen or why that night unfolded as it did. The emotional weight does not disappear. It reorganizes. For investigators, the conclusion of a case brings professional relief, but not always intellectual satisfaction. Some threads remain loose, some hypotheses remain untested. The file closes, but the questions persist. What we know. We know that a man died. We know the act was deliberate, not accidental. We know the violence was efficient and controlled. We know the impact extended far beyond the moment itself. It altered a family. It reshaped memory. It introduced uncertainty into a space that had once felt ordinary. These facts are stable. They do not change with interpretation. What we do not know. We do not know the full internal narrative of the person who committed the crime. We do not know what sequence of thoughts led to the decision becoming irreversible. We do not know why this victim, at this particular moment, became the focus of that decision. The record is silent on whether the choice was symbolic, circumstantial, or something else entirely. We also do not know whether intervention was ever realistically possible. There is no clear moment in the timeline where an alternative outcome presents itself with certainty. That absence matters. It cautions against easy hindsight. Why analysis still matters. The value of examining cases like this does not lie in extracting definitive answers. It lies in understanding how violence can emerge quietly, how systems respond within their limits, and how meaning can remain incomplete even when justice is served. True crime carries an ethical responsibility to resist oversimplification, to avoid turning uncertainty into spectacle, to respect the dead by acknowledging what cannot be known. This case reminds us that human behavior is not always legible, even in retrospect, that some actions leave traces without explanations, that ambiguity is not a failure of analysis, but a condition of reality. Understanding crime is not about solving every mystery. It is about recognizing how fragile meaning can be and choosing to sit with that fragility honestly.